For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in unrighteousness, because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, for God hath shewed it unto them. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Because that, when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened.
First and foremost, I do not agree that Hitler was right. The title is merely to help demonstrate that there is a moral law, and because there is a moral law, there must be a moral law giver. I wouldn't doubt that the title of this video stirred up some form of negative emotion in most, if not all, of your hearts, and this helps demonstrate the truth of the moral law that has been written on all of our hearts. Well, who said that Hitler was wrong or that he was right? Where did these standards come from? Well, whoever said that we should help people, is helping people a universal moral obligation, or is it just true for you and not for me? So why do you think that we should help people, and why do you and I deep down agree that we ought to help people?
But you left me in the rain.
The evidence is not scientific, but moral in nature. It's like the laws of logic and mathematics. The evidence is non-material, but is just as real. Some call this moral law that has been written on all of our hearts a conscience, natural law, or even nature's law. Okay, so every law has a lawgiver. There is a moral law, therefore, there is a moral law giver. If the first and second premises are true, then the conclusion necessarily follows. Of course, every law has a lawgiver. There can be no legislation unless there's a legislature. So, if there are moral obligations, there must be someone to be obligated to. Because we know what's absolutely wrong, there must be an absolute standard of rightness. We couldn't have said that the Nazis were absolutely wrong unless we knew what was absolutely right. But we do know that they were absolutely wrong, so the moral law must exist. Without this objective standard, any objection to evil is nothing but your personal opinion. When we say that a moral law exists, we mean that all people are impressed with a fundamental sense of right and wrong. Everyone knows, for example, that love is superior to hate. Without an objective standard of meaning and morality, then life is meaningless and there is nothing absolutely right or wrong. Everything is merely a matter of opinion. An absolute moral obligation is something that is binding on all people at all times in all places. And an absolute moral law implies an absolute moral law giver.
Ready for love.
So, atheists, many of you conclude that there is no God because of the presence and persistence of evil in the world. And if there really is a good and just God, then why does he allow bad things to happen to good people? So in conclusion, you've long asserted that it would be more logical to believe that God doesn't exist than to try to explain how evil and God can coexist. Well, atheists, how do you know the world is unjust? Does this lead back to the moral law that is written on everyone's heart? Does this mean that there is a moral law giver? C.S. Lewis wrote, "As an atheist, my argument against God was that the universe seemed so cruel and unjust. But how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust?" If there were no moral law, then we wouldn't be able to detect evil or injustice of any kind. Without justice, injustice is meaningless. Likewise, unless there is an unchanging standard of good, there is no such thing as objective evil. But since we all know that evil exists, then so does the moral law. How can one claim to know what's wrong unless he or she knows what's right? One cannot know that 5 is the wrong answer to 2 plus 2 unless he or she has some idea of what the right answer is. It is the height of error and arrogance to claim that no one knows what's right or true. We as Christians are often criticized for saying that we have the truth, but to claim to have the truth, that no one has truth, is self-defeating. The moral law is not always apparent from our actions, as evidenced by the terrible things human beings do to one another. But it is revealed in our reactions, what we do when we personally are treated unfairly. In other words, the moral law is not always the standard by which we treat others, but it is nearly always the standard by which we expect others to treat us.
You got me deeper than deep, and I'm constantly blinded. I'm running around, but there's no place to hide.
If the moral law doesn't exist, then there's no moral differences between the behavior of Mother Teresa and that of Hitler. But we appeal to an absolute, unchanging standard beyond both of them. To believe in moral relativism is to argue that there are no real moral differences between Mother Teresa and Hitler. Freedom and slavery, equality and racism, care and abuse, love and hate, or life and murder. We all know these conclusions are absurd, so moral relativism must be false. If moral relativism is false, then an objective moral law exists. If there is no moral law, then no position on any moral issue is objectively right or wrong, including the positions taken by atheists. Without a moral law, there would be nothing objectively wrong with Christians or Muslims forcibly imposing their religion on atheists. So, by rebelling against the moral law, atheists have, ironically, undermined their grounds for rebelling against anything.
Another boy, another life, another happy ending, and I'll be alive. Another place, another time, another hand to touch, another sun to shine. You got me deeper than deep, and I'm constantly blinded. I'm running.
Sorry, I had